All done. All silent. Going. Go. So congratulations.
Welcome to the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. Each episode, we chat with real estate author and industry leader Peter O'Malley to discuss the current property market conditions and provide insights to assist you on your property journey.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Current Market Insights. I'm your host, Kieran O'Brien, and with me as always is my good friend, Mr. Peter O'Malley. Peter, hello.
G'day, Kieran. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Peter. Back for another week on the podcast. And I actually want to draw from your latest newsletter this week to kick us off, if I can. This month in the Real Estate Report, you open up with an article on conditioning. Conditioning is something we have talked about a little bit on the podcast in reference mostly. But I'm really interested to get your take on why you've decided to write about conditioning now and I guess what the relevance is of this particular tactic at this time in the Sydney marketplace.
Sure. Thanks, Kieran. Look, conditioning is a strategic technique used by some real estate agents, not all, to manipulate their vendors, the home seller, into lowering their property price expectations. And the surest sign of conditioning is an agent that praises your property ad nauseum before they've won the listing and then systematically hits you with negative feedback post-listing. And the reason that I promoted this article this month, Kieran, is that the auction clearance rate last weekend was 49.8% again. So I think counting about 5 of the last 8 weekends, the Sydney auction clearance rate has been dipping below 50%. And history tells us that 50% is the point where property prices start falling. And if the property market's falling, that is no fault of the real estate agents. And why real estate agents don't level with their clients and say, look, you need to know that the odd property is achieving above expectations, but on the whole, 5 of the last 8 weekends, the auction clearance rate has been below 50%, which indicates that prices could fall, particularly with the surging stock levels that we're seeing in spring. So you now know the dilemma that's in the marketplace and you need to price accordingly. But instead of doing that and levelling with their clients, the real estate industry, for some reason, has come up with this low-rank sales tactic of conditioning people, which is just bombarding them with negative news about their home as a way of having them drop their price to meet the market.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. We'll certainly, in our market wrap, talk more about the clearance rate and the impact that is having on the market at the moment. But I'm interested to really open up a little bit more about this idea that conditioning is positive, positivity to begin a campaign and then negativity to progress the campaign. As a seller, how am I able to differentiate between an agent who's bringing me what I might consider to be reasonably genuine feedback about my property and may actually be elements that contribute to the ultimate sale or the progression to sale, as opposed to an agent who is just telling me things that I don't necessarily want to hear as a method of getting me to a quicker sale?
Well, look, prevention is the best cure, as we know. So if you employ a real estate agent solely on the basis that they're positive about the price of your property more so than the competing agents, and they're positive without naming any negatives about your home or understanding any negatives about your home, you're setting yourself up for an overquoting agent. So every property, the finest property in Sydney, the finest property in London, the finest property in Balmain, all has a flaw or two about it. So instead of asking a real estate agent before you employ them what the positive features about your property are, ask them what the positive and the negative features are. What do you think will cause a problem here in the sale of this property that we should be aware of? I know that some people get a little bit paranoid when they're on a busy road. They want to employ a real estate agent who's positive and optimistic and doesn't see the busy road as an obstacle at all. And the reality is that the busy road will be an obstacle. It's not going to be a decimating obstacle to the sale, but it's something that buyers are going to factor in, and they're going to offer a lower price on a busy road than what they would do for the same house in a quiet street. It's very simple, actually.
Okay, so one of the tips you're suggesting is to at the beginning, or even, well, actually, I'll pause and say, we always say the best time to negotiate with your agent is before you sign the agreement. So before you sign with an agent, you're suggesting that we have a discussion as a seller with them about, Peter, as my potential agent, can you write down for me all the good and the bad things that you see in my property and things that may be objections of buyers so that we can, come together and formulate a strategy now? Is that something that you would be happy to have as a verbal conversation, or do you think it's worth, getting all of this in writing and having a really clear structure there so that you have got something to refer back to?
I think a verbal conversation is enough. I always say to people that you should treat the employment of a real estate agent like a job interview. And if you employ people off their resume, you've never seen a bad resume within reason, you don't always get the best applicant, you get the best resume. So it's the same with a real estate agent. If you employ a real estate agent off the sales proposal, you don't necessarily get a good real estate agent, you get a good proposal writer. You get a good graphic designer. Just, I like this proposal, it looks good, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, but the person that designed the proposal is not the person that's selling the house. So you've got to put the real estate agent under pressure. You've got to ask them some tough questions up front before you do sign on the dotted line with them to know how they handle themselves under tough questioning. And you will get a sense very quickly if the agent has considered all factors in their pricing expectations. And, I'm pitching for a business at the moment, and the vendor, the prospective vendor, is absolutely working me over to understand, to make sure that I understand and know what I'm talking about when it comes to price and attributes of the property. And I actually have no objection to this vendor doing this. They're doing it on behalf of, they're a trustee doing it on behalf of someone, because they don't want any surprises during the middle of the campaign. And when you realise that your real estate agent, your happy, smiley, ever optimistic real estate agent turns into the Grim Reaper mid-campaign, and you've invested $10,000 on the advertising and $6,000 on the stylist, and you've signed up for 90 days post-auction, and suddenly they start running dark and negative on you about everything, it's a terrible place to be as a vendor. So the best way to avoid that is not to sign a long agency agreement. You can get away from the agent if they do turn mid-campaign. And can I say that if the market turns mid-campaign, that is not the agent's fault. It's not the agent's responsibility if a property market turns, but it is their responsibility to let you know if that's what happens. And you don't have to sell it, and you don't have to agree with the agent, but you have to respect a real estate agent who tells you if something you don't want to hear during a campaign, which is completely different to manufacturing negative feedback in the form of buyer feedback as a way of driving your price expectations down.
You've addressed a lot of stuff there, and I think there's some really good points in there for our listeners. Just dwelling a little bit longer on the idea of this positive and negative list, do you think there's any risk that some agents might in some way use that to their advantage and just front load their discussions with a bunch of negatives that they could potentially use to then condition? Is there an element of risk there that, unscrupulous agents are still going to find a way to manipulate their sellers in the long run?
Look, managing vendors who, on the whole, will always want a lot more for their property than what the market is likely to bear, particularly if prices do tighten up a bit. I think we all know someone who's telling us what we want to hear versus someone who's trying to deliver the facts to us. So if you think about it this way, your children are so well behaved, Kieran.
Are they?
You look like you've lost weight. Your property is worth $2.5 million. We're all susceptible to messages that we want to hear. We're all weak at that point. That's what you just are my children well behaved?
This is great news.
Tell me more. You look like you've lost weight. I might look like I've lost weight, but I haven't. But we are all vulnerable to such messaging, and real estate agents know this. And as a smart vendor coming to market, you do need to treat the selection of the agent like a job interview and ask some deep probing questions. And that happy, optimistic agent at the listing presentation can turn mid-campaign if you actually haven't fleshed out what the negatives are and how they're going to overcome them. And don't be paranoid about the negatives or the challenging aspects of selling your property. because if you don't address them prior to going on the market, rest assured they're only going to come up mid-campaign anyway.
I would imagine too that most sellers are aware of the challenges with the property, right? They live in it. They may have encountered the same things when they purchased. It's not, being on a busy road or having some damp in the house or whatever it may be. Most sellers are going to know about these things anyway. And I know in your article you certainly recommend that the best pathway, other than taking your time to pick the right agent, negotiating everything early, is also to potentially just front run those possible negatives and I guess in many ways educate your buyers on, hey, these are the things you may have to keep an eye on, and if you're okay with them, we can work together and get a sale.
Yeah, a great question is to say, what do you think could be problematic in the sale of this home that we may not have considered? And yeah, you're probably right on balance. The majority of vendors do know what their strengths are with their property and what their weaknesses are. But as an agent, occasionally someone will buy a property with a fundamental flaw that they never gave the slightest consideration to. And they go to market when they're ready to sell it, and the market hammers them, in the words of their real estate agent, with the same objection, and the vendor is just gobsmacked at the market response to their property when it is a fundamental issue that they themselves completely overlooked when they purchased the property. But, if a real estate agent says to you, for example, I think your property's worth between 2 and 2.2 million, and then during the campaign you're getting told things such as the bedrooms are small, the road's busy, the backyard faces south, the kitchen needs to be replaced. None of that's new information to the real estate agent. So for a real estate agent to ping you for 90 days with that sort of buyer feedback is a classic sign of conditioning, because they knew that at the time of listing. Whereas the reason most agents should just call a shift in the market out for what it is that there looks like there's a bit of a shift in the market at the moment, and it's the agent's duty to make sure their vendors are informed of that, and then it's the vendor's decision as to how they react or not to that.
Yeah, really good recap, Peter. I think it's you're exactly right. I've certainly encountered plenty of that myself in the marketplace where, a great example is Light in the Inner West, where one person buys it because they love the property. They don't really consider the lighting so much because the lights are on and it looks great. And then when they go to sell, 85% of people go, gosh, it's so dark in here. How do you live here? And it's such a simple thing to overlook that an agent, though, certainly would be aware of when they come and appraise that property for the first time.
Indeed, and south-facing properties in summer, for example, are nice and cool. And it's like, I quite like it in here. It's some respite from the heat outside in December. But then if you put that property on the market in July, it's cold, dark and damp, and it's got a completely different atmosphere. It's the same bricks and mortar, but a completely different vibe in the home depending on the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I strongly encourage our listeners to jump on and have a read of Pete's article on protecting yourself from conditioning. It's informative for whether you're looking to buy and or sell. You do mention throughout that discussion, Peter, the shift in the market or potential shift, and you also touched on the auction clearance rate this week. Let's move through and get through our weekly market wrap this week. Tell us a little bit about what's been happening across Sydney.
So on SQM Research's numbers, in the last week, there were 1,089 scheduled auctions with a clearance rate of 49.8%. So let's just call it, rounded off at a clean 50-50. 268 were sold prior to auction and 274 were sold under the hammer on these numbers, with 145 rescheduled. So they're kicking the can down the road to deeper into spring, with 29 withdrawn. There's still some really good prices being achieved out there, Kieran. So we had some great sales last week. I saw some of our competitors in the marketplace had some sales at strong prices. So there's no doubt that if you want to talk the market up, there's enough sales happening at price points that you've got available evidence to say, hey, it's pretty good out there. And then conversely, if you want to say, hang on, the market's got some risks in it, there's a lot of good stock that is not clearing as quickly as the agents and the vendors might have imagined. And there's some, well, as we've discussed, there's an auction clearance rate just below 50% in the last week. And that is the fifth time in 8 weeks where the auction clearance rate has struggled to break through 50%. It must be pointed out to those that are first-time listeners that we don't go off the clearance rate quoted by the media websites on a Saturday night, because they do not include all of the results, and they have a historical propensity to be higher and more optimistic than what the auction clearance rate would be once you've collated all of the results out there.
Yeah, I think it's just commenting on the media sites, comparing these numbers, even, SQM reported 803 auctions on Saturday, whereas Domain said there's only 619 reported. I mean, it's an obvious and glaring difference. I must also sort of comment, I think it's interesting to see that the Sold Under the Hammer has maybe for third or fourth time in the last couple of months beaten the sold prior numbers, which is, as you say, supports the idea that there is a bit of activity still in the marketplace and there are buyers out there looking to purchase. I wonder, do you have any sense on which segments of the market are struggling to close at the moment?
Certainly generic high-rise apartments. I think we're going to talk about the strata issues next week. That was on Four Corners last night, but we'll get across all of that and talk in greater detail about it next week. So strata apartments with problems, generic high-rise strata with high levies, they're the sorts of things that the market is avoiding. Busy roads, so there's a flight to quality. Higher-end priced properties that are fully renovated seem to be doing the best. There's more money, in blunt terms. There's more money and there's more confidence at the top end of the market than there is in the middle lower end. Simple.
Yeah, and it has been that way for most of this year. As we wrap up then, Peter, any thoughts on what we might see in the market this week? Do you think it'll sort of hold true to the current course, or are we likely to see any shifts in momentum at the moment?
Look, stock levels, which is a really big point at the moment, look like they're consolidating at their current levels after rising quite sharply week on week for the last 3 weeks. I think if you saw a further surge in stock levels from this level, that would put vendors across the board under pressure because they'd inadvertently start competing against each other. That surge in stock ties in nicely with people that want to run a 4-week auction campaign and have it done and dusted by the October long weekend. So there's a lot of people that are on that cycle. We had some really quiet inspections. We had some good sales last week, and we had some really quiet inspections last Saturday. And last Saturday was the first weekend in spring, and it was really quiet for some vendors. It was like, where's the spring buys? It's like they're spreading themselves amongst all of the new listings. It's the council elections this Saturday. Will that pose a distraction? We'll wait and see. We'll get into the October long weekend, and stock levels might tighten around that weekend because people don't really plan to be on the market if they can avoid it on the October long weekend. And then I think you'll see another surge of fresh listings coming out of the October long weekend.
Yeah, certainly an exciting few months ahead in Sydney property, that's for sure. Really great chat tonight, Peter. Some really good topics, and certainly a lot of information for people out there, particularly if they are looking to sell. So I appreciate you coming in and appreciate the time taken to speak with us.
Pleasure. See you next week, Kieran.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And thanks to everyone for listening to Current Market Insights. We look forward to speaking with you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. The podcast providing real estate insights you won't find anywhere else.